The kettle wailed like a siren as Evan Brooks stepped over an unmarked parcel on his doormat. He crouched, palms damp, and sliced the tape with a key he did not recognize. Paper rustled, and a letter slid free, heavy with dust and regret. Evan said, "No one knows this address." Ink bled across the page, a careful hand confessing a secret that bent time. The message spoke of a truth buried to keep him safe. Lena Ortiz knocked, then pushed in, eyes wide at the tremor in his jaw. Lena said, "Breathe, Evan, read slow." The words cut anyway, naming a storage unit, naming why the leaving was not abandonment. A phone buzzed on the counter like a trapped bee. Victor Hayes texted, scorn sharp even through glass. Evan said, "He didn't run." The kettle clicked off, leaving a hush that pressed against his ribs. He read the letter again, each sentence a hinge that swung the past open. Lena said, "What happens next?" Evan stared at a small brass key taped inside, bright as a wound. He said, "We find the door it unlocks." The kitchen felt smaller as the rain found its tempo, each drop a metronome for doubt. Evan said, "He hid the truth to keep me safe." Lena leaned on the counter, measuring his breath against the storm. She slid a mug closer, steady as a lighthouse beam in fog. Lena said, "Safety is not abandonment." He folded the letter, corners aligned like a ritual against chaos. The phone buzzed again, and he silenced it without looking. Evan said, "Victor will say I am chasing ghosts." The kettle's metal ping cooled to quiet. Lena touched the key as if testing a live wire. Lena said, "Keys ask to be turned." He pictured a door in the dark, waiting like a held note. The map stared back with a circle that felt like a target. Evan said, "If this is a lie, I break again." Lena said, "If it is truth, you heal different." He nodded once, as if sealing a pact with the storm. The house exhaled, and resolve took the empty chair. The office monitor lit Evan's face while the letter's ink rewrote every task on his list. He tried to answer emails, but words slipped like wet stones. Evan said, "Focus, just finish one thing." A cursor blinked like a heartbeat he could not slow. The hum of the HVAC became the ocean in a shell. He caught his reflection in the screen, a double exposure of fear and need. The dark shape behind him in the glass felt too familiar. Evan said, "You again." The room did not answer, but the silence curled into a voice without sound. The shadow pressed doubt against his ribs, asking who he thought he was. He swallowed and met his own eyes in the glare. Evan said, "I am not broken for good." The cursor steadied, and one sentence finally took root. Outside, sirens wailed, then faded like a passing storm. The address led to a bookstore with its lights off, and its windows full of poems about weather. Rain drummed on the awning, and the bell chimed when no one touched it. Grace Lynn stepped from between stacks as if the shelves had exhaled. Grace said, "Some doors open only when it rains." Evan held out the key and the letter, palms open like questions. She read the unit number and nodded, gaze landing gently on his shaking. Grace said, "Truth has its own weather." He wanted answers, not riddles, but the calm in her voice cooled his panic. She slid a card across the counter with a handwritten hour. Grace said, "When you turn the key, listen for the quiet thing." He looked back at the door, already hearing it. Dusk folded the city into indigo as Evan and Lena reached the storage complex. Fluorescence buzzed like tired bees. He held the brass key, its weight a verdict he had chosen. Evan said, "If I turn it, there is no going back." Lena scanned the corridor numbers and smiled without fear. Lena said, "Back is not where we live." Their footsteps counted down the units until the right door waited, quiet and patient. He slid the key into the lock, felt the teeth align with a soft click. The air tasted of metal and rain. Evan said, "On 3. She nodded, hand on his shoulder, warm as a promise. He turned the key, and the bolt gave way like a held breath finally released. The moment widened, and the dark beyond answered. Evan sat on the storage unit's cold floor, the air heavy with the scent of rust and dust. A single box sat before him, taped shut with the same careful hand as the letter. He said, "This is where he left the rest of the story." Lena crouched beside him, her breath fogging in the stale air, steady and grounding. She said, "Sometimes the things we fear most are only paper waiting to be read." His fingers hesitated before slicing the tape, the sound sharp against the silence. Inside were photographs, his father's younger face staring back like a ghost caught mid-smile. Evan's chest ached as years of anger shifted into confusion. He whispered, "He was here all this time." Lena touched his shoulder, grounding him in the present, her warmth reminding him he wasn't alone. The shadows in the unit pressed close, carrying both comfort and threat, as though the past itself leaned in to listen. Evan pressed a photo to his chest, fragile as breath, and said, "Now I have to know why." The rain had followed them home, painting the windows in streaks of silver. Evan placed the photographs on the table, arranging them as if piecing together a puzzle. He said, "He looks younger than I ever imagined." Lena leaned against the counter, eyes tracing each photo with quiet patience. She said, "He looks like you when you don't know anyone's watching." Evan's throat tightened, the truth cutting sharper than accusation. He picked up a note, tucked behind the images, and read aloud, "For when you are ready." The words hollowed the room, as if time itself paused. His hands shook, yet he refused to set the paper down. Lena said, "Ready is not something we wait for. It's something we decide." Evan sank into the chair, his jaw tense, and whispered, "What if deciding breaks me again?" She met his eyes and said, "Then we learn how to break better." Evan stared at the photos until the ink of memory blurred, then pushed them aside. He powered on the old cassette recorder tucked in the box, its plastic scarred with years. The tape whirred before a voice filled the room. His father's voice, fragile yet certain, spoke, "If you hear this, I could not stay." Evan's breath caught like he'd swallowed glass. Lena pressed her lips together, hands folded tight, listening as though silence was sacred. His father's words unfolded truths of sacrifice and secrecy, things Evan had never been told. Evan said, he left because he had to, not because he wanted to. The tape hissed, a fragile heartbeat in the dark. Tears threatened, but he steadied them with a fist against the table. Lena said, "Now you know, but knowing hurts too." Evan nodded, eyes wet but unbroken, whispering, "It always will." Evan walked into the quiet bookstore again, rain dripping from his hood. Grace looked up from a worn journal, eyes knowing. Grace said, "The storm grows inside you now." He set the photos and the tape on the counter, his voice sharp. Evan said, "He left because he thought it would save me, but it destroyed me instead." Grace closed the journal slowly, her calm unwavering. She said, "Truth is rarely clean. It carries both wound and salve." He clenched his jaw, resisting the riddles, needing clarity more than comfort. Evan said, "I need answers, not poetry." Grace's gaze softened, but her words held weight. She said, "Answers change nothing, but how you carry them changes everything." He exhaled, realizing her silence spoke louder than her sentences. Victor appeared at Evan's office the next day, his suit sharp as his disdain. Victor said, "You're chasing shadows, wasting your life on what's already gone." Evan's jaw clenched, but his voice was steady. He said, "I'm chasing truth, even if it burns." Victor laughed, cold and cutting, shaking his head. Victor said, "Wisdom is in moving forward, not drowning in graves." Evan turned away, unwilling to be cornered by cynicism. The photos on his desk glowed under the lamp, undeniable proof that the past still mattered. Lena stood in the doorway, her silence a quiet shield. Evan said, "You don't get to decide what heals me." Victor's smirk faltered, if only for a moment, before he scoffed and left. The door closed harder than necessary, rattling the glass. Evan pressed a palm against the photos and whispered, "This is my fight, not yours." Evan stood in his dim kitchen at dawn, knuckles white against the counter as the photographs spread before him like an accusation. The storm had quieted outside, but inside him it raged louder. He said, "Why can't I feel at peace with the truth?" Lena rubbed her temples, her patience stretched thin, but her voice steady. Lena said, "Because truth doesn't erase the years you carried lies." He dropped into a chair, shoulders hunched, staring at the brass key still warm from his grip. He whispered, "It feels like a door that keeps moving further away." The shadows on the wall stretched with the sunrise, turning ordinary shapes into distorted forms. The silence hummed until he slammed his palm down, startling them both. Evan said, "I don't know if I can do this." Lena placed her hand over his, grounding him. She said, "You don't have to do this alone." The air trembled with the weight of unsaid fear. Evan closed his laptop after hours of silence, yet his mind screamed. The reflection in the dark screen showed a second face behind his own. The voice in his head whispered, "You'll never be enough." He muttered, "I know you're not real," but his chest tightened with every word. The shadow leaned closer in the glass, its outline sharp in places, blurred in others. Evan pressed his palm to the screen, trying to blot it out, but the voice pressed harder. The walls felt closer, the hum of electricity louder, until he shut his eyes and shouted, "Stop!" When he opened them, only his reflection stared back, wide-eyed and shaking. Sweat trickled down his temples as he whispered, "I don't want to fight you, but I have to." The silence after his words felt like the pause before an avalanche. Victor barged into Evan's office uninvited, his voice sharp as glass. Victor said, "You're unraveling, chasing ghosts in boxes." Evan stood, his jaw tight, fists at his sides. He said, "At least I'm brave enough to face what scares me." Victor scoffed, pulling a chair with a scrape that echoed like nails. Victor said, "Bravery? No, this is obsession, and obsession eats men alive." Evan leaned across the desk, close enough to feel his rival's breath. Evan said, "Maybe obsession is what it takes to finally see clearly." Their stares clashed, the air electric, until Lena appeared in the doorway, her voice breaking the tension. Lena said, "Enough. Fighting him won't silence what's inside you." Evan stepped back, chest heaving, as Victor smirked. The silence left behind felt poisonous, lingering even after Victor's words faded. Later that night, Lena found Evan sitting on the rooftop, knees pulled to his chest. The city lights flickered like restless thoughts beneath them. She said, "You're tearing yourself apart, Evan." He stared at the skyline, face hollow. Evan said, "What if the truth doesn't heal me? What if it ruins what's left?" She sat beside him, the chill biting through their clothes. Lena said then, "Let it ruin you, because broken isn't the same as finished." He turned, eyes shining with unshed tears. Evan whispered, "I'm scared of who I'll be when it's over." She leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. Lena said, "Then let's be scared together." The hum of the city swelled around them, carrying both comfort and loneliness in equal measure. Grace found Evan back in the bookstore, his face drawn, his steps heavy. She closed the book in her hands and looked up with eyes that felt like anchors. "Grace," said, "the storm is not outside anymore, it's within." He set the recorder on the counter, jaw trembling. Evan said, "I keep hearing his voice, but it feels like it's fighting me, not guiding me." Grace stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on the counter near his. She said, "Sometimes wisdom first sounds like a challenge, not a gift." His eyes narrowed, frustration burning. Evan said, "I don't want riddles. I need something real." Grace met his gaze, unwavering. Grace said, "Then listen to yourself, because the voice you hear most often is your own." His breath caught, the truth striking sharper than her calm delivery. The silence that followed demanded more than words. Evan stood outside the storage unit again, rain pounding harder than before, his chest heavy with expectation. He slid the door up, metal screaming like a wound opening wider. Inside lay another box, smaller and taped in red. His pulse quickened as he whispered, "What else did he hide from me?" Lena followed him in, her shoes splashing in the shallow puddles gathering on the floor. She said, "Not everything hidden is meant to wound." Evan tore at the tape, fingers raw, and inside lay hospital forms with his father's signature. His voice cracked as he read aloud. Experimental treatment, denied, terminal. The words struck like thunder. He dropped the papers, knees bending as the weight stole his breath. Lena knelt, arms wrapping him as if to hold the storm itself. He choked. He didn't leave me, he left death chasing him. The rain outside roared in agreement. By evening, Evan's anger replaced grief as he paced his apartment. The hospital forms spread across the table like evidence. He shouted, all these years wasted hating him, when he was dying alone. Lena sat silent, letting him burn his fury out. He slammed his fist into the table, rattling the coffee mugs, his eyes wild. Evan said, he should have told me, anything would have been better than silence. Lena finally spoke, her tone quiet but firm. She said, would you have forgiven him then, or would you still carry the same pain? He froze, breath sharp, as her words carved their way in. His fists unclenched, shoulders slumping as the fury ebbed into despair. Evan whispered, I don't know who I am without my anger. Lena's eyes softened, but her voice held truth. She said, maybe now you'll find out. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm. The next day, Evan met a man outside the cafe who looked startlingly like himself, older but broken. The stranger introduced himself as Daniel, his father's closest friend. Daniel said, I carried the truth when he couldn't. Evan stared, the mirror of resemblance unsettling. He said, so you knew, and you let me hate him all these years? Daniel's eyes lowered, his voice heavy with regret. Daniel said, I thought anger was easier than grief, but I was wrong. Evan's throat closed as he saw in Daniel the reflection of what bitterness had made. Evan whispered, you're what I'll become if I don't let this go. The moment burned like sunlight through fog. Daniel nodded slowly, as if giving permission. Daniel said, then don't follow me down this road. Evan clenched his jaw, resolve rising with the ache. That night, Evan dreamed of the storage unit, filled not with boxes but mirrors. In every reflection, his shadow self stood closer, its eyes black voids. The voice whispered, you are nothing without pain. Evan shouted back, I am more than this. The shadow smirked with his own face and said, you can't let go. I am what keeps you alive. He charged at the glass, fists striking, shattering shards flying in every direction. Each shard showed him failing, breaking, crying alone. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, as the reflections screamed louder. Then a single shard remained unbroken, showing Lena's hand on his shoulder. The silence around it grew larger, until the noise drowned away. Evan whispered, I'm still here. He woke trembling, sweat-soaked but alive with the sense that he had faced a part of himself no one else could see. Evan returned to the bookstore, exhausted, carrying both hospital forms and the recorder. Grace looked at him as though she had been waiting all along. Evan said he was dying, and I hated him for it. Now I don't know if I've lost him twice. Grace reached for the forms, her touch light but certain. She said, you cannot lose what you carry inside. Evan shook his head, tears spilling. He said, I don't know how to forgive him or myself. Grace's gaze softened, voice steady. She said, forgiveness is not forgetting. It's choosing to walk forward without chains. Evan lowered his head, his tears falling onto the papers, blurring the ink. He whispered, I don't know if I'm strong enough. Grace's reply was quiet, certain. She said, strength is not in knowing. It is in walking anyway. Evan lifted his head, the storm in him calmer, though far from gone. Evan sat at his desk, the hospital forms spread wide, when a folded paper slipped from between the pages. His breath caught as he opened it to find a handwritten letter addressed to him. He whispered, he wrote to me. The ink was faint but deliberate, words crafted with the patience of someone running out of time. His father's voice spilled from the page, apologizing for silence, explaining that leaving was never abandonment but a shield. Evan's throat tightened as he read aloud, I prayed you would forgive me even if you never understood. His hands shook, the letter blurring through his tears. Lena entered quietly, her eyes falling on the scene. She said, "That's the voice you've been waiting for." Evan nodded, his body trembling with a storm of grief and relief. He pressed the letter to his chest and whispered, "I thought I hated him, but I just missed him all along." The room felt smaller, heavier, and more alive all at once. Evan returned to Grace with the letter folded carefully, as though afraid to break it. Grace studied his face before speaking. Grace said, "You carry more weight than words alone should hold." He placed the letter on the counter, his voice trembling. Evan said, he apologized, but too late to hear me answer. Grace traced the edge of the paper with her fingertips, her gaze steady. She said, "Apologies do not arrive to erase pain. They arrive to show love tried to stay." Evan's shoulders sagged, as though a final defense had crumbled. He whispered, "So why do I still feel empty?" Grace smiled faintly, her expression carrying sorrow and wisdom. Grace said, "Because forgiveness is not about filling emptiness. It's about learning to live with space." Evan looked away, struggling, his chest rising in shallow breaths. Yet his voice grew stronger as he whispered, "Then maybe I'm ready to try." That night, Evan sat alone listening to the recorder again, his father's voice echoing softer now. He whispered back between breaths, as if answering a ghost. Evan said, "I hear you, I don't hate you anymore." His eyes closed as the tape hiss filled the gaps, carrying silence that felt more like presence. Tears tracked down, steady, not wild. Lena entered with 2 cups, setting one beside him. She didn't speak, only sat across, her presence like a tether. Evan opened his eyes and said, "It feels like he's here, but not in the way I thought." Lena nodded, her own eyes shimmering. She said, "Some people stay inside you even when they're gone." The tape clicked to its end, leaving the room heavy with quiet. Evan exhaled, his voice raw but steady. He whispered, "I think I can carry him now, not chase him." For the first time, he almost smiled. Evan stood outside in the rain, the city humming around him, the letter in his pocket like a heartbeat. Daniel appeared again, face lined with regret. Daniel said, "I couldn't protect him, but maybe I can help you carry this." Evan faced him, the anger of before replaced with quiet recognition. He said, "I don't need you to carry it, I just need to know he wasn't alone." Daniel's eyes watered, voice breaking. Daniel said, "He wasn't. I was there when he asked about you every day." The words pierced through Evan's chest, leaving him breathless. He closed his eyes, letting the rain wash down his face, indistinguishable from his tears. He whispered, "Then maybe I can forgive myself too." Daniel placed a hand briefly on Evan's shoulder, silent solidarity. For the first time, Evan didn't pull away. The rain softened into mist, as if the storm itself finally exhaled. Back at his apartment, Evan laid the letter, photos, and recorder together on the table. He sat silently, staring at the collection of a life once lost. Lena sat nearby, her presence steady. He said, "I spent so long hating shadows, but now I see him in the light." His voice cracked but carried calmness too. Lena smiled faintly and said, "And you've found pieces of yourself in the process." Evan nodded, finally letting silence stretch without fear. He whispered, "Maybe imperfection was never a curse, just the truth I couldn't accept." The words lingered in the room like an offering. He leaned back, tears drying, breath slower, the weight shifting into something new. The storm outside had passed, leaving only the quiet drip of water from the eaves. Evan whispered one last time, "I forgive you," and the room seemed to exhale with him. Evan dreamed again, but this time the shadow wasn't just behind glass. It stood before him in full flesh, his own mirror twisted with fury. The shadow sneered, "You are built from pain. Without it, you collapse." Evan's fists curled, his body trembling with both fear and defiance. He said, "I am not only what broke me." The shadow advanced, its voice searing. "You're nothing if you forgive him." Evan shouted, "Forgiveness is not weakness." His voice cracked, but carried force. The room around them fractured, walls splintering into echoes of every mistake he had ever made. Evan fell to his knees, clutching his chest, whispering, "I will not be owned by you." For the first time, the shadow recoiled, its form flickering with cracks of light. The dream tore itself apart, leaving Evan gasping awake, sweat clinging to his skin like chains breaking loose. Evan jolted awake on the couch, chest heaving, sweat soaking his hoodie. Lena rushed in, alarmed by his gasps. She said, "What happened?" He covered his face with trembling hands. Evan whispered, "I saw him, the part of me that wants me broken." She sat beside him, pulling his hands away gently. Lena said, "Then you faced him. That means you're stronger than he is." Evan shook his head, voice cracking. He said, "I'm terrified I'll become him if I fail." She pressed her forehead against his, voice steady and certain. Lena said, "Fear doesn't make you him, choosing differently does." His eyes brimmed, his breath slowing, her words anchoring him. For the first time he let himself rest against her shoulder, his voice low. Evan whispered, "I don't know how to do this, but I know I can't do it alone." Later that day, Evan returned to Grace, holding the letter and recorder one last time. His face was drawn but steadier. He said, "I've fought him, the part of me that keeps me chained." Grace closed her journal, her eyes patient. Grace said, "And what did you learn?" Evan hesitated before answering, "That forgiveness doesn't erase the shadow, but it stops it from leading me." Grace nodded, her voice soft. She said, "You've begun to see the difference between carrying and being carried." He looked down at the letter, folding it with care, his tears falling quietly, but not breaking him. He whispered, "I thought I was chasing him, but all along I was chasing myself." Grace's smile was small but knowing. Grace said, "Now you walk with yourself, not against." The words settled inside him like embers that refused to die. Evan finally confronted Victor in the office, his rival's smirk sharp as ever. Victor said, "So, did your ghosts give you peace or just chains?" Evan's voice came calm, firm. He said, "They gave me truth, and truth doesn't belong to you." Victor's eyes narrowed, venom lacing his words. Victor said, "Truth is useless if it keeps you from moving forward." Evan stepped closer, unshaken. He said, "No, it's what lets me move forward without fear." The air between them pulsed with hostility, yet Evan's calmness cut sharper than anger. Victor sneered but faltered at his steadiness. Lena appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed, silent but certain in her support. Evan said, "You don't get to define what strength is for me anymore." Victor's smirk wavered, a crack appearing in his confidence. For once, silence beat him. That night on the rooftop, Evan stood under the vast sky, the storm clouds breaking to reveal stars. Lena joined him, their shoulders brushing. He whispered, "I thought the shadow defined me, but it was only fear." She looked up at the stars, her voice steady. Lena said, "Then let fear remind you that you're alive, not broken." He breathed deep, the cool air filling his lungs without pressure. He whispered, "For the first time, I don't feel chained." She smiled, her hand finding his. Lena said, "That's because you've already chosen who you are." Evan exhaled slowly, gazing at the horizon, the scars inside him no longer weights but markers. He whispered, "I'm ready to live, even if imperfect." The wind softened, carrying away the remnants of silence that had once drowned him. The night after the confrontation, Evan sat in silence, his apartment washed in soft dawn light. The storm had passed, yet the echoes lingered in his chest. He whispered, "I survived, but I am not the same." The photos, letter and recorder lay neatly arranged before him, not as weapons but as reminders. Lena sat nearby sipping her coffee, her presence steady and grounding. She said, "You don't need to be the same. You only need to be honest." Evan closed his eyes, letting her words settle like calm water over jagged stone. For the first time, the silence didn't suffocate. It simply existed, and he could breathe within it. He whispered, "I think I can carry this now." Later that morning, Evan and Lena walked along the riverbank, the city waking behind them. The air smelled of wet stone and renewal. Evan said, It feels like carrying him doesn't weigh me down anymore. Lena smiled faintly, eyes on the water. She said, because you're no longer dragging the shadow, just walking with memory. He breathed deep, shoulders loosening, his steps no longer heavy. For the first time in years, the horizon felt open rather than threatening. Evan whispered, maybe this is what peace feels like. Unfinished but real. The river carried his words away like secrets finding a place to rest. Evan returned to the bookstore one final time, letter in hand. Grace looked up, her knowing eyes meeting his without words. He placed the letter on the counter and said, I don't need to read it again to carry him. Grace nodded, her smile soft but proud. She said, wisdom is not holding tighter, it is knowing when to let it rest. Evan bowed his head slightly, tears brimming but not spilling. He whispered, thank you for teaching me to listen, even when it hurt. Grace closed the letter gently, sliding it back toward him. She said, keep it, not because you must, but because you choose to. He tucked it away carefully, his chest lighter, as if space had been made for something new. That evening, Evan sat with Lena on the rooftop, the city glowing beneath them. He said, I thought perfection was the answer, but all I found was emptiness. Lena leaned closer, her voice firm but tender. She said, imperfection is not weakness, it's where truth lives. Evan laughed softly, the sound surprising him. He whispered, then maybe my scars are the truest parts of me. She rested her head against his shoulder, and they sat in silence, the stars scattered like broken pieces reformed into beauty. He closed his eyes, no longer fearing what lay within. The night felt vast, and for once, it didn't feel lonely. The next morning, Evan stood at the storage facility once more. He locked the unit and pressed the brass key into Lena's hand. She looked at him, questioning. He said, I don't need doors to the past anymore. I carry him here. He tapped his chest gently. Lena closed her fingers around the key, nodding in quiet understanding. The air smelled of rain's aftermath, crisp and new. Evan looked toward the horizon, his voice steady. He whispered, this isn't an ending. It's the beginning I never thought I'd find. With that, they walked away together, the sun breaking through clouds, light spilling across the concrete like a blessing.